Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. MLS is back, and what better way to start the season than a rematch of last year's Eastern Conference Finals between TFC and the Columbus Crew? Would TFC be able to successfully defend their MLS Cup title? Would players such as Jovinko, Altidore, Vasquez, Bradley, and Osorio be able to rediscover the form they achieved last season and go one step further? What about the new signings? Would they make TFC better or worse? And what about the Columbus Crew? Would they be able to provide a proper title challenge to TFC? It all starts here, and don't worry, here at the interviews, we've got you covered. So on this edition of the interviews, I'm going to briefly break down TFC against the Columbus Crew. So TFC, the Columbus Crew, the opening day of the MLS season, TFC looking to retain their MLS Cup title. Who do they face first? Rivals Columbus, a rematch of the Eastern Conference Finals. Who would get the edge? Who would start the season on the right note? When we look at the board, we got TFC in the red, we got Columbus in the blue. TFC playing in the 4-4-2 diamond with Jovinko and Altidore up front, Victor Vasquez just behind them. They had Osorio and Akeshte as the shuttlers, and then Michael Bradley sitting very deep in midfield. For Columbus, more of a 4-2-3-1. Zardes started up front, and behind him they had the Federico Higuain, the maestro just in behind him. They had Martinez and Santos on the flanks, and in midfield Will Trapp and Artur. What went wrong? What went right? When we look at the game and we analyze it very closely, just the difference in the defensive shapes and the pressing was the key here. The pitch was bad. It was a windy day. Those are excuses that both teams can use, but at the end of the day, it's the execution, it's the defensive discipline, the defensive prowess. How did they really get the job done? How did Columbus really nullify TFC? That was the key talking point here. Well, they did it in various ways. In terms of the way they pressed, TFC could not get it going. Jovinko and Altidore couldn't get on the ball. The midfield couldn't get on the ball. How did Columbus do that? Well, we get to the board and we look at it. Obviously, we got Columbus in the blue. What went well at the start of the game was the fact that they varied their pressing. It wasn't the same method every single time, and TFC just couldn't cope. When we look at one of the first mechanisms that they used, it was where they had the front two pressing out wide, pressing this way, and cutting off passes into Michael Bradley. Bradley couldn't get going. That was pivotal. And then what happened is that they'd sit off and let the front two go forward. That was key. They didn't mind that the center backs would go forward and get on the ball, because then they would cut off the passes. How would they cut off the passes? Well, the wingers would sit deep, and that was pivotal right there. And what they would do, they would shut out the shuttlers. So then you cut out the shuttlers. You can't pass the ball to them. Then the fullbacks would use their energy and push forward, and they would cut off passes into the TFC fullbacks. And that would be pivotal. And then when you look at it, the only player that you really have open and available is Victor Vasquez, but you got two markers on them plus the center backs. TFC were outnumbered in that aspect, and Columbus did a very good job in that respect. The other mechanism that they used, or the other way that they really did get at TFC, was the fact that if they did press with the front two going forward and then have the wide men push high, what they would do is that they'd encourage Will Trapp to step forward or Artur to step forward and press Bradley. Then where do you play the ball? You got the center backs marked out, you got the wide players going out to the fullbacks, and then you have Will Trapp stepping in and cutting off that pass to Bradley, and they had nowhere to go from that perspective. That was another way they really got at them. And then the last way that they got at them was pretty simple. Right here, you have the forward kind of brushing off. You have Higuain sitting on Bradley. You push these guys narrow and then just push that in. So obviously you have the spare man there, but they had a different way to cope with TFC. And if they didn't want to press, what they would simply do is sit just ahead of Bradley and then keep it narrow like that. And like I said, just push the fullbacks a bit higher, have them press the TFC fullbacks, and that's basically what really stopped TFC from getting going. Akeshte couldn't get going. Osorio was probably one of the brighter spots in terms of, he didn't really, like I said, Osorio is a good player, he's improved, but apart from the ball retention, the moving into space, the work rate, he doesn't really create something out of nothing. Scoring goals, assisting goals, needs to improve that, but he did dribble past opponents, really get something going from that aspect. Victor Vasquez was anonymous. You look at Jovinko and Altidore, still it's the the combination of really trying to get it right. They look great when they can combine around the box, but in terms of the build-up play, that wasn't really there. There was no service. It was very lackluster from that perspective. So that's where Columbus really got going. And then from an offensive standpoint, it's just the fact that Michael Bradley isn't a natural defensive midfielder. My gripe with him is the fact that as good as he was last season, the fact that when he plays a natural number 10, he struggles, and he struggled against Higuain from the offset. You look at the first 13 to 15 minutes, Higuain already created 5 chances. What Higuain did was he varied his movement, very key in that respect, especially in a clogged midfield, possibly taking up deeper positions there, deeper positions here. He was all over the pitch. You look at the first few minutes, he plays that long ball into Zardes, should break free, offside. He does it from a deep position right here at half. You look at the second chance, he runs behind, gets into space behind Osorio, slips in Martinez, who should be a bit higher. He breaks into the box, just fires a shot wide. Another chance where he slides it into Martinez, he breaks free, hits the post. He created chances for Santos, one where he just kind of slid behind a catch day, got the ball from Valenzuela, who was very high throughout the game, slides ball into him, should get a chance to score, fires it up Bono. Higuain was everywhere, and when you look at the goal, you kind of look at, and we'll get to this in a second, it's just him popping up into spaces, the TFC midfield lacking the discipline to get onto him and really change the aspect of that game. And it's just simple movement, lateral movement, dropping deep. And the difference between TFC and Columbus here was the fact that there was work rate in Columbus's game. They knew where they had to be. They pressed effectively. They pressed as a unit. When TFC pressed, it was more individualistic. It was disjointed. One man would go, and they were simply bypassing them in that respect. The other aspect was that when Columbus had the ball, TFC dropped off. They dropped off basically in what looked like a 4-3-1-2 because Vasquez had no real intent on covering Will Trapp, and that was pivotal throughout. Let's just get these guys back into their natural shape. So when we look at it, Artur was able to go a bit forward. Will Trapp would split the defense, but Vasquez wasn't really getting there. So it was almost always 3v2 at the back. Artur had time on the ball. Trapp had time on the ball. Higuain had time on the ball. But when you look at TFC, their midfield didn't have time on the ball. Will Trapp was able to play passes forward. Akeshte didn't really know his role because he should be shifting out. When you're in a 3-man midfield or in a diamond, the shuttlers push out to the fullbacks. Osorio did that very well, and we didn't see much of Harrison Affle, but Valenzuela did push forward at times, and when he did push into those areas, we didn't see much of a catch day there. Valenzuela was pivotal in the goal. When we look at the goal, it's an Artur diagonal, and it just basically sums up everything wrong with TFC in the first half. Artur not pressed, Valenzuela getting forward because Akeshte doesn't get over, and then Higuain's running off of Bradley. Bradley not tracking his run, finishes superbly. Bono probably could do better, but it's a tough shot to save, 1-0. And when we look at that from a TFC perspective, it's just very poor. You kind of question why Akeshte and Van der Wiel start on the same flank in their TFC debut, not really familiar with the system, probably not enough game time or training time to really get that right. They struggled throughout, they looked lost. That was pivotal. You go to the second half, within the opening seconds, again, down this flank, Akeshte is caught out centrally, and then you have Santos bursting forward. He picks out Zardes, making a superb run behind Mavinga, slots the shot past him. TFC down 2-0, and again, it was more of the Higuain show, just back heels, finding spaces, drifting out wide, drifting deep, creating chances around the box. TFC didn't have any answers for that. Victor Vasquez's injury forced them to make a change. They switched to a 3-5-2. What happens there is Van der Wiel goes into a center back position. This is the 3-man midfield right there. They bring on Oro, who started as a wing back. In that respect, he could play forward, and that kind of shifted everything that Columbus was trying to do in that regard. We kind of have to get them back into their shape. So let's get them back into their shape right there. And what it allowed TFC to do in that regard was allow them to push their players a bit, their wing backs forward. So we saw more of Morrow getting at Affle, which was key, but the crosses weren't really that great. And then when you look at it from that regard, you got 3 there, you got 2 there, and then you have Oro also pushing deeper. But what they did well, Columbus, was that they still kind of kept that narrow shape, and they still had numbers in midfield to really make the difference. And TFC did have a spell where they pressed well. There was a chance where Mavinga dispossessed Martinez, and that led to an Osorio shot. You look at the first time Bradley got an open space to play diagonal to Jovinko, and he ended up hitting the post. And then even later on in the game where Keshte hits the crossbar. But there weren't enough chances where TFC really created through open play and had a great spell of dominance, and that was really the issue here. And after that, they kind of settled back into the game, Columbus, and how they pressed. How did they do that? Well, when you got Bradley kind of dropping off, what they did was they had their forwards pressed there, and that was basically it. They had their 4 men pressing, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then they had 2 midfielders there, and everything kind of worked out. They went man for man, and that didn't really help TFC either in that regard. So they're still able to press from the front, still able to prevent TFC from building out of the back, and then they had the midfield clogged up, and Jovinko and Altidore never really got a sniff throughout. Yes, there were a few chances. Possibly TFC could have scored, and on another day, maybe that shot off the post or off the crossbar goes inside the net and changes the game. But here it's about the discipline. TFC lacked it. The work rate, TFC lacked that. Columbus had it. They were the better side on the day. They deserve a lot of credit. And although this may not be an indicator for what is to come for TFC, when you look at their last 2 games over the past week, they weren't very good and they need to be better. Perhaps they need to change the system. Perhaps they just need to work harder. Perhaps it's just the fact that they haven't really settled into the season. New faces, new system for them as well. They have to adjust, but at the moment, they weren't the better side on the day. Columbus deserve a lot of credit. TFC didn't shut down Higuain. They couldn't cope with the press, and they couldn't find ways to get Jovinko and Altidore into the game, and Bradley suffered dearly. But let me know what you guys think. Meet me in the comments below. Don't forget I upload videos every day, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And that was your daily dose of the interviews.